Let's imagine you get out of bed in the morning and you've no real idea of what you want to do. No specific intentions for your day. So you wander into the kitchen and you're not really hungry. So you wander off to the garden and there's not really a lot to do out here, and you wander into the garage and it's probably not a good idea to go for a drive barefoot and in your underwear. So what are you really doing? The answer is not a lot other than just wandering around aimlessly. The reason that you're in this situation is because you just started doing stuff without any real plan, any real intention, any idea of where you were going or what you wanted to do. And this is also a problem that can plague our animation work. It can happen plenty of times, and believe me, I've been there. You find yourself a little devoid of inspiration, but you're wanting to get on and do something, or needing to get on and do something. So, you just get your character and you just start moving them around. You think, okay, well, I'll just sort of have them walk over here, and then I'll have them sort of sit down or look over there or something. And what invariably happens when approaching an animation this way, when just trying to make something move with no particular plan of the reason why it's moving, with no clear intent coming from the character, with no real motivation on show, you wind up with very lackluster and generally lifeless animation, irrespective of how technically good the motion itself might happen to be. Thus, having a plan, a clear intention, and a clear set of motivations that are driving your character is one of the key things to creating decent character animation that has actual appeal, that will actually engage a viewer or an audience. Now, of course, that's a very situation-specific topic. It's going to vary from animation to animation an awful lot, what the motivation is for your character. It's certainly not going to be true that you have the same intentions and motivations going on through all these different animations, and there's no technical rule book that you can apply to tell you what to do. You simply have to apply your own imagination. However, what it does lead us into is a very common workflow proposition for animation, and that is the use of reference. If we pop on over to YouTube here and just search animation reference, we'll find a whole bunch of different videos that pop out, and what we broadly see is there are two types of reference footage that you can take for yourself. There is the technical detailed reference footage, we'll come to that in a minute, and there's planning and action reference footage. Let's take a little peek at this progression video from Frozen for the Do You Want to Build a Snowman clip here. What we see, this is our animator here. You can see that he's filmed himself sort of acting out these motions. He's putting himself into the character. Playing things out like this by yourself, whether on camera or not, is a great way to, work through the planning process imaginatively in your head, thinking about, what's driving the character, what sort of moves you're going to need, what poses, and all of that are going to tell the story of the specific shot or sequence that you're working on. What you can also do, of course, if you do film yourself doing something of this nature, is the other thing that people commonly turn to reference for, and that's to sort of use it as a starting point from which to work into the animation itself. You essentially having, captured yourself acting stuff out on video, then of course, bring that up on your screen or a second monitor or what have you, and start, broadly speaking, copying it into your actual character rig, into your actual scene file and on your animated character. Irrespective of how you go about actually putting your animation together, what process you go through for blocking out your poses or getting in your motions and everything else, you will find that it's always far, far quicker to just stand up and move about than it is to sit there, posing a character rig. As such, doing your planning, physically yourself is by far the quickest and easiest way to work through the planning stages and figure out, I'm not really, inspired by this movement, or I really love doing this thing with the arms, stuff like that. And then having it as video is massively useful when it actually comes to then taking your character and trying to, pose it and move it through the scene. The one thing, however, that you should often be careful not to do, especially if you're going to do something, toonish, if you're working on a cartoon character, but even if you're trying to produce a more realistic animation, is that you should treat your reference purely as reference, not as a strict blueprint. As such, what you're taking from it, is grand poses, some of the transitions, how you move from one pose to the next. You can take cues on timing of actions, how long a hold needs to be held for, which moves should be, quick and snappy versus those which should be soft and flowing and so on and so forth. What you really don't want to do is to just go slavishly trying to copy it frame by frame by frame. Of course, often what you'll find is the way that you do pose and move your own body, and sometimes the way that you're limited in how much you can pose or move your own body, will be very different from the kind of articulations that are available to the character you're working on. Hence, if you do just take your reference footage and just try and make a perfect copy of it with your animated character, you'll often lose something. You'll miss opportunities for, making things slightly different on the character, for shifting timings around, or, exaggerating poses, or perhaps underplaying certain transitions. As such, working with this kind of reference, even if it is without a camera and just sort of, moving around and recording thoughts in your own head, for the planning process as a kind of a blocking process for where your animation is going, is hugely important and will give you a great head start on producing better animation. The other kind of reference then that we commonly use is this very technical reference, where we're trying to understand a specific, body mechanic that goes on within a certain type of movement or creature or character. You see, of course, in this video what we have is this, it's slow motion, of course, and it's also got this grid worked over it, so as you can see great detail in what's happening during a walk cycle. Again, you wouldn't want to take this and just try and copy it perfectly. Why? Because different characters will have different gaits. Maybe you're doing a short-legged character, maybe you've got a big, long, lanky-legged character. Maybe you're doing a male or a female or an alien. What you're looking for in this type of reference is, the specific sort of key pose details of, where the major poses are and where the major transitions fall, whilst picking up certain cues on timing and spacing from them. This becomes extra important when we get onto creature and animal animation. Human animation, we have a far better natural, instinctive idea of how things move. One, because we're watching people moving around us all the time. We've been watching them our entire lives. And also, of course, because we ourselves move around as humans, have been doing so our entire lives. Just sort of using your own imagination and instinct and just sort of trying to cobble something together can often, wind up giving you something that's at least halfway correct. However, with creatures and animals, although we may have observed them over time and we may, have ideas in our head about how they move, sometimes those ideas are wrong if we haven't really studied their motions in any kind of depth. There's a great and oft-cited example of why this is so important to go through, which is the animation of the owl in the very first Harry Potter movie. I've had a look around to try and find the specific shot. Unfortunately, I couldn't. The one that's most telling is it's a shot out in the courtyard where Harry has the owl, and there's this, crane camera view from above, and as the owl flies away, the camera sort of tracks with it, and we see, Harry disappearing down into the distance as the camera pulls up. Anyway, the thing that happens during that is we have, our owl-like creature here, and the owl is flying and flapping its wings, and you've got the wings are up, and they come down and push backwards, propelling the owl forward, and then they come back up again like this. And so what we wind up with is this sort of flight cycle, something like this, as the owl is flying up into the air. No big deal, all well and good, except that it's not. This is not how birds actually move their wings in flight. If we try to imagine it and we think about it, it seems to make sense. You're pushing the air down and behind yourself to try and get lift. It feels like it should be right. In our head, it seems like it should be right, but it's not. It is completely and utterly wrong. If we look at this from the side and we imagine that instead of being a bird, it's actually a whale working his flippers as he goes through the sea, then actually that's correct. This is the right motion for a whale flipper, but it is the wrong motion for a bird wing. Why is it important? Well, consider again the example of Harry Potter. It's a visual effects shot. The animated owl is supposed to be portraying a real owl. Yes, I suppose you can argue that it's a magic owl, but really, that sounds like a bit of a cop-out. It's important, of course, because in the context of a visual effects shot, you need to create a suspension of disbelief for the audience. Now, it's only going to be, an animator or someone who is particularly knowledgeable about the flight mechanics of birds who's going to sit there in the cinema, see that shot, and immediately go to themselves, oh, that's wrong. But even your common everyday audience member is going to see that shot and something may often feel wrong about it to them. They won't be able to tell you exactly what it is. They'll just have this sort of sense in the back of their mind that it somehow looks a bit fake. Why? Because they've seen birds in flight, either in real life or on TV or anything else, and they've got this vague memory of, how they look, even if they don't know or remember the specific mechanics of it. And then when they see this kind of flight taking place, it's close, but it's not quite the right sort of match. Something feels wrong. It's kind of an uncanny valley sort of situation. However, had the animator who produced it taken more time to do his research and look up his reference of exactly how such creatures fly, how they work their wings, how they attain lift and everything else, then chances are he would have animated it properly and correctly. The overall lesson to take away from this is that poor planning, or lack of any plan, often leads to poor results. Creating our own reference of things can often help us with the planning process as we work through moves and motivations and just work through space in our minds. And turning to proper reference on specific issues of body mechanics of different types of creatures that we may need to animate, and making sure that we research those details properly, will enable us to create animations that actually have the correct kinds of movements and timings and mechanics present in them. Bringing all three of these things together when we approach animation will always lead to much more successful, much more appealing, and much more interesting final product